Welcome to the Mahindra seminar on universities past, present and future here at Harvard University. My name is Manja Klemenčič. I am an associate senior lecturer at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at the Department of Sociology, and I'll be chairing this session. It is my privilege to welcome the speaker for our session today, Marko Seeber, who will be speaking about academic publishing under pressure, and in particular about the role of transparency in peer review. Marko Seeber is professor of public policy and administration at the University of Agder in Norway. He holds a PhD degree in organizational studies and has previously worked in Italy, Switzerland, and Belgium. He has a broad research portfolio with many important publications. Among his key research topics are higher education policies and policy instruments, where he was looking at the new public management and research metrics, science, interdisciplinarity, academic careers, openness of higher education, scientific systems, and science institutions more generally. Marko has published broadly in a number of venues, and his co-authored paper on the competition for attracting talent won the Swiss Prize for Research in Education in 2019. Marko is also one of the drivers and at the forefront of the movement that is appealing to share peer review data, and has been interviewed on this very topic and has been writing for this in Nature, and has been also in the project working on this, an evaluation of project funding addressed to the European Commission. For the purposes of full disclosure, Marko Seeber is co-editor-in-chief of the European Journal of Higher Education, which I too am a co-editor of. So we do have a professional relationship, and he will probably be speaking about a very exciting new initiative, the new policy that this journal is launching, which Marko has been the leading role for, which is in fact about transparent peer review policy. So we will have a session for an hour. Marko will be speaking about half an hour, and then we will be opening it up for questions and answers. We are recording this session in view of posting it later on at the websites of the Mahindra Center seminar series and our own website of the university's past, present, and future. So without any further delay, I will be welcoming all the participants. First of all, thank you for joining us for this lunch on in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and dinner on seminar in Central European space where Marko is on. And I'm handing it over and welcoming again Marko for joining us for the seminar.
Thank you so much, Manja, for the invitation and the kind introduction. Thank you to the Mahindra Humanities Center for hosting this seminar, and welcome to the participants. So let's move straight away to the content of these proposals, which is, as the title say, about mostly the status of peer review and the current pressure on peer review. So peer review is a central institution of modern science. Research findings are not considered reliable until they have passed the scrutiny of reviewers. Therefore, peer review is adopted by nearly all academic outlets to select scientific contributions. However, the legitimacy of peer review is increasingly challenged by scientific and publishing malpractices. So in this seminar, we examine and explore what factors contributed to the diffusion of these malpractices, and explore the role of transparency potentially to preserve the quality and fairness of the peer review process. We begin this presentation by exploring how did peer review in the first place become such an important institution in modern science. So let's do a little bit of history. So the first example known of peer review process dates back to the year 1665 at the philosophical transaction of the Royal Society. Now, if we consider that the end of the scientific revolution coincides with the publication of the Principia by Newton in 1687, we could get the impression that peer review has always been a key pillar of modern science. But in reality, peer review diffused only in the second half of the 20th century. In 1936, for example, Albert Einstein discovered that the editor of Physical Review had sent his submission to other physicists for commentary. And he wrote to the editor, "We had not authorized you to show our manuscript to specialists before it's printed." So he didn't expect a peer review process. Actually, Nature took most of the decision in the hand of the editors until the 70s, when it adopted more widely peer review. So the adoption of peer review is a relatively recent process. We could get the impression that it's immutable, but it's not. It has been changing over time. And its adoption was probably driven by increasing massification and specialization of scientific production, so to handle efficiently the large number of manuscripts. But politics also played a role in the institutionalization of peer review, and particularly through grant peer review. So the institutionalization of peer review for research grants selection actually preceded and favored that of journal peer review. So we are now familiar with long, very complex and detailed research proposals. Here on the right side, an example. So it is quite stunning to look at how proposals look like in the early 20th century. For example, this is a successful grant proposal written in 1921 by Otto Warburg, a German biochemist, which literally writes, "I need 10,000 mark, full stop." So research grant funding actually at the time was exceptional. It only institutionalized after the Second World War. Between 1948 and 1953, US federal spending on scientific research increased by a factor of 25, and this large amount of money was allocated also by newly established institutions like the National Science Foundation. At the time, however, the selection process of proposals was in the hands of a small internal panel of scientists or the agency directors themselves. Now, however, this system started to get in crisis with the growth in spending and the economic stagnation of the 70s, when Republican and Democratic politicians began to openly criticize the decisions made by the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Health. Gradually, political and media pressure increased and led to a series of hearings with the National Science Foundation directors. In that context, a very important tension emerged between scientific autonomy on one side and public accountability on the other side. And was in that context that this tension was solved by deciding that it was anonymous peer reviewers, not directors anymore, that should be trusted to determine which proposals deserve founding. So this process was crucial in increasing the legitimacy of peer review as a way to select both research proposals, but it also contributed strongly to the institutionalization of peer reviewers as the final judges in selecting also scientific contributions in journals. So we could say that in this first phase, the pressure for making an efficient use of resources contributed and was instrumental to the institutionalization of peer review, and as peer review key for scientific legitimacy. However, over time, a sort of perfect storm developed over the course of the last 3-4 decades, combining the emergence of research metrics, like first impact factors and then many more others, the introduction of new public management policies, of university rankings, that were also driven by the objective of making an efficient, a more efficient use of resources, but they also contributed to exacerbate the pressure on academics for producing ever greater quantities of publications, which had several problematic effects on peer review process. Let me highlight how. So peer review relies on voluntary work. Academics conduct peer review and they are not rewarded typically for this work, or they are rewarded in a very symbolic or non-monetary way. And this system worked pretty well for a long period of time, but as scientists become increasingly under pressure to publish and to achieve certain indicators of productivity, they also have less time for peer review. And this means that it has become more difficult for editors to find reviewers. And it seems that also the quality of reviews had suffered. Peer review also relies on trust. For example, reviewers don't have access to the original data used by the authors to produce a certain analysis. So there is a certain degree of trust that underlies this process. However, as scientists get under pressure to publish, they also have stronger incentives to cut the corners in a way. And these typically tend to erode trust between the authors and the reviewers and the editors. For example, we have been observing a worrisome growth of scientific retractions and scandals. So retractions implies that a scientific article that has been already published is retracted because some possible mistakes or malpractices have been identified. For example, I quote Oransky, which is the founder of Retraction Watch, a website, a blog that observed retractions in scientific publishing. He recently wrote in Nature, when we launched the blog Retraction Watch in 2010, journals were averaging about 45 retractions a month. Last year, so nearly 300 a month. And our database of retractions is up to nearly 35,000 entries. Increasing competition and pressure for productivity also implies more competition to reach few highly reputed outlets. And peer review also had the tendency observed by many to become very burdensome and also costly as a process. More studies highlighted this problem. For example, Bedeyan, already in 2004, noted about peer review in top management journals reviews were typically short overviews. Now, 8 or more single-spaced pages are not uncommon. In certain fields, the peer review process can last several years. In 2012, so we are talking about more than 10 years ago, already Australian scientists, just Australian scientists, spent 550 working years to write proposals to Australia's large funding schemes. So, to summarize, the increasing publication pressure is one of the major drivers of what is perceived to be a general crisis of peer review, with increasing concern about the fact that it tends to be slow, it can be inaccurate, and even costly. But the publication pressures also fueled the growth of a new business model in scientific publishing that was able and is able to meet the huge demand to publish. And this business model is called the article processing charge. So let me spend a few words about this second major development. I need to talk about the business model in scientific publishing. We can distinguish basically two main models. Of course, in scientific publishing, we also have major non-profit publishers and publishers owned by learned societies. But when we talk about the very large for-profit business, then we have these two models. A traditional one, which is subscription-based, and a rather emergent, much more recent model, which is the article processing charge. So let me describe these two models and what are their potential implications for science and for peer review. Let's talk first about the traditional subscription-based business model. In this business model, the revenues comes from public libraries paying subscription fees to allow their employees and members to read the content published by a given journal. So in this business model, the client at the end of the day is the reader. And the objective of a reader is to read high quality materials, very good quality scientific publication, reliable and valid. The publisher goal is also, of course, profitability, which is achieved with a higher number of subscription, with high subscription fees, and this can be achieved if someone is able to provide a high quality content. In this model, the editors of the scientific journals are scientists, and as scientists, their prime goal is to increase their prestige, improve their reputation, and so forth. And this is also achieved through quality. So if we look at this model, we have, in principle, and often also in practice, an alignment of the objectives and the incentives towards quality of the three key actors: readers, academics, editors, and publishers, which all have a common stake into a rigorous and selective peer review to achieve high quality. Let's move to the new business model, also known as open access. Although the open access movement is something much broader, which was also and is still partly followed by a large number of non-profit actors. In this system, the revenues comes from authors who publish articles. When an author publishes in an APC journal, will pay a fee, and this will make its work open, accessible to everybody. The client in this system is the author, and the goal of the author is to publish. the authors have also a very strong pressure to publish. Therefore, from the emergence of these kind of journals, we have been observing a super growth of APC publishers. For example, one of the largest one, MDPI, from 2015 to 2021, just in 6 years, rose from 17,000 to 233,000 publications, and their revenues skyrocketed from 14 to almost 300 million Swiss francs. Consider also the evolution in terms of the largest scientific journals. In 2010, the largest journals were all subscription-based, with the exception of PLOS ONE, which is a large non-profit open access journal. Now, how this has changed? In just 12 years, this scenario has changed completely. There is not a single subscription-based journal in the top 25 largest journals in the world, and they are all for-profit open access or a couple of open access non-profit. To be more precise, 21 are open access for profit, and of which 13 from MDPI, 6 Frontiers, and 2 Nature Springer. So let me stress this: these 2 publishers are very young compared to the traditional ones. In these journals, typically, there is a vast use of so-called special issues. For example, in this picture, we see the evolution in the number of special issues at MDPI in the last 5 years, which means typically that peer review is managed by guest editors, so the authors themselves. So with this strategy, 2 goals are achieved at the same time. On one hand, they attract a lot of submissions, and at the same time, they further reduce the cost for managing the peer review process. Now, what are some risks associated with the APC business model? We tend to associate good things to the open access model, and rightly so to some extent. But there are also some risks, especially when this is associated with a for-profit motivation. So the publisher profit derives, as we just saw, from authors publishing articles, which means that the goal is basically to maximize quantity. The journal editors, when they are scientists, we just saw also that they aim to increase their reputation, to have high quality contributions, so they tend to be selective. This is clearly a clash of the goals between 2 key actors, the publisher on one side and the journal editors, which are central in the management of scientific publishing. So what typically happens is that in APC journals, the editors are not academics, they are not scientists. So they're a little bit put on the side. So we see this transformation to peer review as a ficus leaf. So the very, let's say, risk effect is a progressive delegitimization of peer review as an institution. So what's next? Over time, research has gradually revealed several limitations of peer review. So there is a growing debate inside the academic community about the fate of peer review. What should we do with it? And maybe peer review is entering into a phase of deinstitutionalization, but there are different ideas on what to do. On one side, we could say that some defend the idea that peer review has limitations, but the benefits are superior to alternative solutions, and reforming may actually produce unintended effects. So to paraphrase Churchill, let's say peer review is the worst way of selecting manuscripts or proposal, except for all others. On the opposite side, there is another view that sees peer review as simply broken and we should basically abolish. But we can also see a middle ground perspective which recognizes the limitation of peer review, but also that, like any other kind of institutions, a work of maintenance is necessary to keep it functioning, and therefore explores ways to improve various aspects of peer reviews and to address some of its limitations. So in a nutshell, its motto would be peer review must be reformed to be preserved. So clearly, the fate of peer review depends on trends happening in the broader scientific and political, economic environment. But that said, we can zoom in on some of the proposed solutions. Some academics propose to, for example, get rid of journals and peer review at the same time. So this would imply replacing scientific journals and ex-ante peer review with large open digital repositories, which would work through scientists judging quality of manuscript by themselves, or by creating, for example, feedback mechanism through citation, or mechanism similar to when we rate restaurants or movies, or with positive reviews from other scientists. There are, however, some possible unintended effects of following this path. Journals do play an important functional role sometimes, but also if we look carefully to this model, it also has some intrinsic challenges. Each person, for example, will have to assess the validity and novelty of a manuscript. And some may be good in doing that, while others may not be better than reviewers. Plus, the fact that everyone would need to repeat a sort of peer review every time means that overall, much more time will be consumed for the purpose. Without the system of journals ranking in a way reliability and validity of contribution, scientists would rely on a mechanism of recommendations, for example, or ratings. But these imply two things. First, that they would need to spend a lot of resources into advertising their work, something that they already do, by the way. But it might also unleash some severe opportunistic behaviors, like trying to inflate one's own ratings. Moreover, there is also a bit subtle effect. When a junior scientist is able to publish in a top journal, it will leverage the prestige and reputation of that journal. And this is a very effective and efficient way to give prominence to some important results, even if they are produced by someone relatively unknown. But without such mechanism that leverage journal reputation, readers will tend to naturally trust researchers that are already known and reputed, and this, at the end of the day, will increase inequality in terms of reputation and attention, which is already known in science as a problem in the Matthew effect. Let's move to consider some of the maintenance work, which tend to preserve, in a way, peer review quality and fairness. One of the most important database of a scientific journal, the Web of Science, for example, every year lists journals with dubious peer review process. Recently, for example, this year, the Web of Science just removed the MDPA flagship journal from their list. Just to put this information in context, this is the second largest journal in the world which lost its impact factor. This journal published 17,000 articles in a year, increased 13 times in just 6 years. some efforts are also done at the national level. For example, in Norway, we have a publication archive which define what are the so-called X journals when they have dubious peer review. So in the Norwegian Register for Scientific Publications, Series and Publishers, we can find a list of these kind of journals and sometimes publishers. Maintenance also occur at founding agencies. For example, some scholars have argued that lotteries can complement peer review for grant proposals, and some organizations like New Zealand Research Founding Agency and Volkswagen adopted lotteries to allocate part of their resources. What is the rationale of that? We know exactly what are the pros and cons of peer review to start with. So research has shown that peer review is quite precise and effective in distinguishing bad from good proposals, but it's not very good and it struggles in distinguishing good from excellent proposals. So this implies that if we aim to achieve that level of precision, we would need a lot of resources and obtain not good results. We also know that peer review tend to be a little bit risk averse. So proposals or articles that are more daring, risky, find a harder life in the peer review process. So what can be done is to actually organize the review process for grants into two phases. In the first phase, peer review is used to identify good proposals and get rid of bad proposals. And in the second stage, a lottery will be used to choose which proposals to found among good ones. So this could be an efficient way of using peer review without overstating its capabilities. A final effort that I would like to mention is precisely transparent peer review, which is in the title of the presentation. So the shift to transparent peer review implies the publication of peer review reports anonymous. In some cases, also including the response letter of the authors, and in other not. And the report will be become an open online attachment. So in this regard, it's different from other solutions like open peer review, which implies also the publishing of the names of the reviewers. In this case, it's just publishing anonymous peer review report. The transparent peer review has been in recent years, very recently actually, adopted by other journals like Nature and Quantitative Social Studies of the Meat Press, with mostly positive outcomes. So typically you can find the peer review reports and attachment online. A recent study, for example, monitored the effects of publishing peer review reports on the reviewer's willingness to review, the type of recommendation, and review turnaround times, as well as the tone of the report, and found basically no difference except a slightly more positive tone. The goal of transparent peer review is basically to reveal the quality of the peer review process, its rigor, and this also makes life of predatory journal more difficult, because predatory journals actually do not have a peer review process, or they have just a facade peer review process. So it would be more difficult for them to produce these signals. So as a matter of fact, being able to define and distinguish predatory from non-predatory journals is not always clear-cut, because there is a scarcity of information and data, and because it is difficult to prove the quality and rigor of peer review. But however difficult it is to demarcate legitimate from illegitimate scientific outlets, it is of foremost importance, because it affects the legitimacy of scientific claims, professional credit for hiring, tenure, and promotion, and the publication of peer review reports precisely aims to demonstrate the quality of peer review and to expose for scientific and peer review practices. So it could be a small but very important initiative in this respect. Transparent peer review also supports fairness because one can scrutinize the peer review process and verify that there was no preferential treatment, for example, in the context of special issues or for well-connected scholars or reputed scholars. In fact, this is a renowned problem. Previous studies found that previous co-authorship author-editor is associated with reduced time for handling a manuscript, and that in journals owned by universities, insiders publish in large numbers and much faster. Last but definitely not least, transparent peer review also enable research on peer review. One of the major limits to understand and improve peer review is precisely the difficulty to access data about peer review. So publishing reports can contribute to activate a virtuous cycle of maintenance and better practices. Finally, we would like to spend a few words about the initiatives at the journals credited by Manja, myself, Michele Meoli, and Cristina Sen. So the journal is actually starting a pilot policy, just started a few days ago with our editorial, to publish for 12 months anonymous peer review report. So the articles received after the launch of the policy and accepted for publication will, at the time of the publication, include a link to an online peer review report, including anonymous peer reviews from all rounds of review. Publishing peer review reports at the European Journal of Higher Education is to be conceived as a micro-level, bottom-up initiative in the context of a broader movement, which we have seen includes different kinds of organizations at different levels, communities, to preserve the high standard of evaluation of academic quality and scientific publishing. It aims to preserve the production of credible knowledge in a period in which we've seen it is severely threatened. Thank you for your attention, and I give back the floor to Manja.
Marco, thank you so much for this outstanding review, historical review of the development of the peer review practices, and also review of the contemporary discussions and the controversies regarding the peer review. Really wonderful. I will use this to my students who should be watching it. We have already a number of questions in the Q&A, but maybe just I would like to invite anybody who would like to pose it. I will be giving a floor to those three that we have questions here already, and I'm inviting more. But maybe let me just take my moderator's privilege to start with the first question. Marco, my question would be, what are some of the criticisms of the transparent peer review policy, and how would you address those criticisms? So if another journal, we are the first journal now in the among the higher education journals to pilot this policy. If another journal would be considering it, what kind of criticisms might be out there, and how would you address them?
Thank you, Manja, for the nice comments and the question. So, well, I think one of the main concern could be from the editor's side to see reluctance of reviewers in accepting to peer review, which is natural. So they might be afraid that reviewers will not be more willing to review. Existing evidence suggests that there is no such an impact. So I just mentioned few slides ago, one study from Bravo that tried to examine this problem and they found no effects in terms of the willingness to review. We will also monitor these in our case. And also these journals that have adopted this practice recently also found mostly effect. I think this could be explained by the fact that academics do peer review not because they get the rewards, but because they mostly want to contribute to the academic community. So if producing a public report also contribute to the academic community, we probably don't see a reason for be less likely to accept. From the reviewer side, some are maybe afraid to be recognized. So that's why the transparent peer review approach, they are kept anonymous. Let's say that some reviewers may include references to their own work to cite. So indeed, if they put references, may help to identify them. But it is also behavior that editors might want to curb a little bit, because it's not desirable that you fill reviews with many references of your own work. Maybe also one comment that we have seen in the discussion on the blogs is that it could imply extra work of polishing, let's say, the review text. But also in this case, I think if we take the amount of time in developing the review, the time devoted to polish a little bit the lexicon is probably not a major one.
Thank you so much for this answer. Now I am inviting Lokman to Tunku, who was also, whom you referenced in your slides for the first question. Lokman, can you speak? I gave you the speaking privileges, so I'm hoping...
Yes, I can speak now. Thank you for inviting us. It's a pleasure to listen to your speech. The question I want to ask is about the open access publishers, such as MDPI and mega journals, who publish a large amount of papers. I'm wondering if they have a profit motive in doing this, because they seem to publish larger papers than traditional publishers. And if there is, does it cast doubt on their publication model, and how leading universities see this, whether they can use the academics in these universities can use them in promotions? Or does that affect you to publish in these journals? Thank you.
Thank you, Lokman, for the question. Definitely, there is a big discussion going on in the academic community about whether these are legitimate outlets or not. Many scholars of good quality and in good faith have published, so it should not be a stigma for single academics to have used these outlets. At least they haven't do it on a regular basis. It's a knowledge that is developing in the academic community about also these issues. For example, recently the Norwegian ecosystem signaled some of these outlets. I've mentioned before that Web of Science has also delisted one of these journals. I think it's when it comes to then a real decision, comes to academic promotion and hiring, these kind of decisions are still in the hands of the profession, in most places. So we are less impressed by these kind of numbers, especially when we are going to select or promote a colleague. We are going to make a wise assessment and not just look at crude numbers. But it is definitely more problematic in some disciplines when there is a tendency to publish in very large numbers, and when indicators like H-index have become popular already for many decades, where it's maybe less of a problem in social science studies still. But we need definitely to keep an eye, I think.
Thank you for this. Thank you. Thank you to Lokman. The next question goes to Elena Denisova-Schmidt. Elena, I gave you speaking privileges, please, to pose your question. Let's see if we can hear it, Elena.
Yeah, hello, dear Marco, dear Manja. Many thanks, Marco, for your very interesting presentation. I have a question on mall practices. You mentioned in your presentation. What is the most problematic mall practices, the most problematic issues from your point of view, probably from the point of view of the editorial team? Can you share some interesting cases and probably some interesting and effective solutions? Merci.
Thank you so much, Elena, for the very important question. So I think it's important to make a distinction between, let's say, severe malpractices that imply, for example, fabrication of data, plagiarism. These are really, let's say, voluntary, explicit, and sometimes very dangerous malpractices. But I would say probably the evidence is that they are not still extremely common. What I think is more subtle and probably more common malpractice is to try to publish by closing a bit your eyes, in the sense that as we know that it's important to produce novel findings, and sometimes the pursuit of positive, significant results may lead to practices that are not really appropriate, like the selection of, for example, methods that produce the desired research. So it's in a way an almost sometimes unconscious way to distort the way you research, the type of data and approach you select, that will lead you to the desired results that can increase the chances of publication. I think that's much more vast. There are also surveys that suggest that these type of behavior are very common. But of course, if there is a huge pressure to publication, that's also a problem. It's a trade-off. When we introduce certain type of strict incentives, there are also then side effect of trying to cut the corner. So I think it's difficult to address in a simple response, but it's something on which scholars, I think, are putting more and more effort.
Thank you for this answer. To you, Mark, as well. We have a comment by Sefika Mertkam, please.
Well, hi, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. My comment is about the policies seems to be transferring from sort of MDPI published journals to journals published by Big Five. It's basically, the special issues has been fast increasing in subscription-based journals as well. And these journals are believed to be, or were believed to be, quote unquote legitimate, quote unquote respected journal published by the Big Five. And we have seen a lot of reactions, sometimes going over hundreds, 300s, from what once used to be believed to be quite legitimate journal from Big Five respectable publishers. And usually guest editors are the ones to be accused of for sort of manipulating the peer review process. So I don't think what we've once believed to be true, that those practices are or should be sort of related to open access journals, Hindawi.
I think we have lost you, Sefika. I'll give a chance to Marco to respond on your comment briefly.
Thank you, Sefika. If I understand the direction where you were going,
these practices are associated with open access journals as well.
Okay. Sefika is back, but I'll allow Marco to try to kind of fill in the gaps in what we have missed.
If I understand the direction where you were going with your comments, Sefika, partly was cut by the audio. I do agree, definitely. So they were the forerunners of a certain business model, which was found to be extremely profitable, and therefore probably adopted by many other publishers. So I'm not making, definitely not myself, this is not even the core topic of the presentation, to set the boundaries between, it's very highly debated what are reputable or predatory or gray publishers. But definitely there are many shades of grays, different degrees of adopting these kind of practices. It's, I think, important for the academic communities to become aware of these downsides of associating a certain business model with scientific publishing, and the risk and the possible negative implication of this model, which was born with very positive intention and still can achieve very good results. But we need collectively to study more and understand more. Thank you, Sefika.
We will have a chance for two more questions. The next one goes to Ronald Barnett, please.
Well, I hope you can hear me. You're nodding very nicely. Very nice presentation, if I can say so. And hopefully there'll be a special issue coming out of this conversation, but that's another matter.
Not in our journal. Not in our journal.
Somewhere, perhaps. Just a quick comment, but I wanted to ask a question. My quick comment is that I didn't see how your proposals really matched up to your analysis of the problem earlier on in your paper, because you were quite rightly pointing to the difficulties of journals securing good reviewers. They're very busy. They've got other things to do with their time. They really do struggle to find good reviewers. And I wasn't sure how you were going to address that point that you yourself had made. But anyway, I wanted to ask this question. I wonder whether you'd agree with me that we've seen an increase in editors of journals publishing papers in their own journals. And if that's the case, what are we going to do about it?
Thank you so much, Ronald. Well, let's say that the struggling finding reviews is one of the problems. It's not the main topic of this presentation. I've written about that in other papers that maybe we can keep in contact. I can share with you. Let's say that introducing transparent peer review is neutral to that. It's not expected to increase acceptance, and hopefully not to reduce either. When it comes to editors publishing on their own journal, again, it depends at the end of the day if we expect that if it's something that happens on a systematic base, first of all, and then it highlights the problem that the moment we judge scientific contribution of a scholar based simply on numbers, we can be easily fooled. Of course, if we would look at contribution one by one, we would be able to see that a publication happening in the same journal where you are an editor. So that's, I think, another good example of not assessing automatically authors using productivity indicators. We should look into the real content, the real knowledge, and where it is produced. And of course, there might be, in some cases, a conflict of interest in publishing in your own journal. I totally agree.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Ronald.
The next question is by Hugo Horta, please.
Hi, Marco. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Hugo.
Hi, Marco. This was really great presentation. I really enjoyed it. I was just wondering, when you were talking about transparent peer review, came to my mind the journal F1000 that, publishes very quickly pre-reviewed research. Of course, it's open access, and whoever publishes there needs to pay for it. But then I noticed in this journal that papers stay there for quite a long time without any single review. And then at some point they get reviewed. And to be honest, the reviews it's all transparent. They publish the whole process. I think they even identify who the reviewers are. But is this a good model, or this is a good alternative model of transparent peer review? Yes or no, why?
To be honest, I'm sorry, but I don't know well enough this model. Is it? So I can't express really extensively. I don't know to what extent it's similar to the model adopted by Nature or QSS or our journal.
No, QSS, you submit. You know, they publish everything, but basically the paper is only published when it's accepted to be reviewed.
Yes.
Here, you submit the paper and the paper is immediately published. It's simply reviewed later.
Well, I think basically they are abdicating a major function of scientific journal, which is the gatekeeping function. So, okay, you can flag that this is an unpublished, a non-peer-reviewed manuscript. So it is a little bit like the status of preprint. But as you suggest, maybe sometimes it took a lot of time to have the reviews you need. I know other journals that when you submit the paper, ask you to publish a preprint at the same time. So like forecasting, technological forecasting and social change, they do like that. So you submit the article and then you at the same time publish the preprint, but it's on another repository. So maybe that could help. Let's say you distinguish, you are in the preprint, but publishing on the same journal, I don't know. And then you correctly suggest how often they finally receive a review and what is the quality of this review. Is there a selectivity there? Because you create like a sort of a limbo where you don't have a clear purgatory, where you don't have a clear distinction between, of course, we need to be aware that even if it's published, it's not like, you know, written in the stone, but still it makes a difference, I believe, if you have gone through a serious peer review process.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ugo.
Thank you.
Professor Barnett, did you have a hand on? If you have, I gave you the speaking privileges, and then we do still have time for Johanna Anala. So please stay with us. Professor Barnett?
Well, I didn't actually, but since you're giving me the chance to come in again, let me just share a thought with you, Marco, and I don't know whether you want to respond to it, but I've got to be in my bonnet about the quality of reviews of peer reviewers. Now, I know they're very busy, but I get younger researchers and newer researchers showing me reviews sometimes that they've received, and it's no wonder that they are sometimes distressed, because the quality of the reviews that they've had is very poor. And now, some journals are trying to address this and are trying to devise on screen or electronically guidance to reviewers. But it is an astonishing feature to me, to my way of thinking, that by and large, this is a major element, as we've been saying, of the academic life. But reviewers, by and large, have had no training whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I totally agree. There is also, I think, this is an important area of research. I've been collaborating recently with founding agencies into tools to improve the capability to identify good expert reviewers. There is research to try to motivate reviewers, to train reviewers. So this is, let's say, we are at the beginning of opening a bit the black box of peer review. There are a lot of things that should be done to improve the process. At the same time, if again there is a super strong pressure to publish, reviewers would not have the time to do appropriate review. And time is really important in doing a good job.
Well, I'll just quickly add, if I might, I know another colleague wants to come in, but I just add quickly that there's a difference between doing a high quality review and doing a review which is damaging, personally damaging to the author. I see too many reviews in which reviewers don't have a sense of the reviewers having a developmental function. They just pile in with their very damaging and negative judgments in a very savage and unhelpful way.
This is probably a reminder for all of us as editors as well to come out into the academic conferences more and do our meet the editors function of also hopefully educating peer reviewers in the developmental function of the peer review, especially when it comes to the younger colleagues that are just starting publishing. Thank you so much for this point, Professor Barnett. I promised Johanna Anala the last question. We are a couple of minutes over, but Johanna, please, last question for this panel.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for this very good talk and discussion here. So this relates to the previous questions also. What I wrote here, that to be transparent, some reference wish to sign the review, and also one reason for this is that they want to. They wish that their referee reports are more polite and more positive if people sign them. Another question is this, that because it's so difficult to get reviewers, that all kinds of rewards, access to journals or some fees or something are wished in traditional journals. So I'm asking that, are these just something what I've seen, or are these broader trends what you have seen?
Thank you, Johanna. You mean about incentives?
Incentives, yes, for attracting reviewers, right, Johanna, if we understand you correctly.
Okay, so basically, there has been a couple of surveys exploring why people accept to review. And most of the motivation are intrinsic, let's say, pro-social. So people choose to review because they like to review to some extent, and they want to contribute or reciprocate to the in the academic community. Probably it's also a reputational signal. So you are dealing with colleagues. So if you accept or refuse to review, it's the same editor that sooner or later it's going to judge your own work. So these, I think, are really very strong drivers. When it comes to introducing extrinsic motivators like rewards, so in terms of money, it is used in some fields. It is a relatively common practice, but it's not really much diffused. And there are, let's say, pros and cons. Some research found out that the quality actually don't increase. And one of the cons is that reviewers then might accept to review even if they are not expert, or they might end up to review just to get the money, and then they will do probably a low quality review. I did some research myself with a natural experiment on non-monetary rewards with different kind of settings, so competitive and non-competitive. And we found out that it was not really effective, and it was even sometimes harmful when associated with competition. For example, when you say rewarding the best reviewer, that's very dangerous, because you crowd out, typically in psychology, this is a known effect, you crowd out intrinsic motivation. So the moment you give a reward or an award, the other people say, well, I was doing this for the community. I was doing this for pro-social motivation. If I have to do it for money, no, this is not enough. So they say typically pay enough or not pay at all. This problem has been seen also for blood donation. They've been paying people to donate blood, and there was a decrease in people donating blood. So yeah, that's, I think I would join a roundtable at next IPA in Toronto about this problem of finding reviewers. And I think one point that I've been reflecting is editors should do a very good job. They should be very selective, probably in the first place. I think sometimes people don't like to accept papers that are of low quality or which they are not expert. So good work of the editors, creating maybe tools that can help to identify good reviewers. These are also a very important area, I think.
On that note, I would like to thank all of you participants for being with us, for the excellent questions that have been brought to the panel. And I would like to thank Marco Seeber for the excellent review of the peer review, for reminding us all as authors, as editors, as peer reviewers, as members of the publishing community of the importance of the peer review. Thank you everybody for being with us. We will be back in a month's time with our last talk in the seminar series by Rila Rapper. But thank you for today and wishing you all a good day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.